Nothing dramatic happened. No market crash, no disaster, just one ordinary purchase that exposed something uncomfortable. A life that looked stable from the outside was balanced on a number that was way too small. The contradiction is what hurts. You can have a real job, pay most bills on time, and still be quietly losing ground every month through 100 small decisions that never feel expensive in the moment. So let's follow what happens when someone starts building wealth in their 30s, not to look rich, but to stop living in permanent reaction mode. The transformation is slower than fantasy and much more powerful than hype. The real beginning wasn't motivation, it was self-honesty. At 34, Oliver finally stopped asking whether he was doing okay and started asking a harder question. If nothing changes, what does this life look like 3 years from now? On paper, the income seemed respectable. After taxes and deductions, though, the monthly picture told the truth. Enough to look competent, not enough to cover the actual rhythm of his spending. The gap wasn't enormous. That made it more dangerous.
That's one of the strangest parts of personal finance in your 30s. Your life can be visually convincing. You can own the costume of stability long before you own the systems that make stability real. The first surprise wasn't the big expenses, it was the background noise. Wealth often starts with noticing how much energy and cash get absorbed by services you stopped actively choosing months ago. He wasn't broke in the dramatic sense, he was exposed. That's a different problem. Exposure means one interruption, a repair, a deductible, a slow month at work, can turn an ordinary week into a financial emergency. A lot of people stop right here because they think the important years already passed, but starting later is only fatal if wealth is purely a stopwatch game. In real life, maturity changes the math. By your 30s, you usually know more, earn more, and recover from your own excuses a little faster. You may have missed some early compounding, but you've gained leverage in income, self-awareness, and decision quality.
So the target changed. Not millionaire by next summer, not performative success. The first goal was smaller and smarter. Create enough margin that life stops feeling like it can knock you over with a single shove. That's a better definition of wealth anyway. Not a screenshot, not a status signal. Wealth is the ability to absorb pressure, make decisions without panic, and help someone you love without collapsing your own life in the process. Before investing more aggressively, before optimizing anything clever, he needed a baseline. What does it cost to keep the lights on, stay fed, stay insured, and get to work? That number became the first real target. The first progress looked almost embarrassingly ordinary. Sell a few things, cut some recurring costs, delay a couple purchases. None of it felt life-changing, but the point wasn't drama. The point was proving that direction could change. $500 doesn't make you secure. What it does is interrupt helplessness. It's the first moment you can see that money is no longer only something that leaves you. Some of it can stay and defend you.
The first 1,000 was not financially dramatic. Psychologically, it was enormous. It meant an inconvenience no longer had automatic permission to become debt. It meant his future had finally started sending support back to the present. Then came the move that matters more than discipline: automation. When money has to pass through your willpower every month, your emotions get a vote. Automation reduces negotiation. It lets your priorities happen before your impulses wake up. He didn't need a complicated system, he needed clear lanes. One lane for living, one for near-term protection, one for future growth. When money lands without a job, lifestyle inflation usually volunteers to assign one. A good budget doesn't scold you, it routes you. It turns vague intentions into visible paths, which is why it feels less like restriction and more like finally getting the steering wheel back. He also learned a subtle trick: make bad decisions slightly annoying. Extra steps, delayed checkouts, unsubscribed promo emails, small friction changes behavior. You don't need perfect character. You need an environment that stops helping your worst habits.
This is where the process gets socially uncomfortable. Building wealth in your 30s often means looking slightly less spontaneous than people around you. Not because fun is bad, but because constant convenience is expensive in ways people rarely total up. He didn't shrink his life into misery, he just stopped financing an identity he didn't actually need. A slightly less impressive apartment,
a fully paid older car, fewer treat-yourself purchases. Those raises are where a lot of financial progress quietly disappears. If every increase in income gets translated into a more expensive normal, you stay in the same emotional place with nicer receipts. Oliver captured the raise before the lifestyle could absorb it. He wasn't trying to attack everything at once. He focused on the balances doing the most damage. High-interest debt doesn't just slow wealth building, it taxes your future decisions before you've even made them. Another upgrade was naming the money. One pile for true emergencies, one for predictable annual hits, one for insurance gaps. Vague savings can vanish into vague spending. Specific money tends to defend its purpose better. The first positive month barely looked impressive, but a surplus, even a small one, changes the story. It means the system is no longer quietly eating itself. There is now at least some space between effort and collapse. That's the first reward people underestimate: sleep. Not luxury, not victory laps, just fewer 2 a.m. negotiations with the future. Financial stability often announces itself first as reduced background noise inside your own head. Here's the part that never goes viral. Wealth often starts feeling repetitive before it starts feeling exciting. That's good news. The moment progress becomes boring, it usually means the system is finally stronger than your moods. A random Tuesday became more important than any motivational weekend. When the transfer happened automatically and he kept working without ceremony, that was real progress. Financial maturity is often quiet enough to be mistaken for nothing. The market gave him his next lesson. A scary headline feels personal when your money is new, but consistency matters more than emotional timing for most people. The goal wasn't to feel fearless, it was to keep acting on plan.
Even extra money got a new role. Instead of becoming a random spending event, the bonus was split deliberately. Some to strengthen the base, some to grow the future, and yes, a little to enjoy the fact that discipline should still feel human. His spending logic also improved. Cheap isn't always frugal if it keeps forcing repurchases. Over a long horizon, durability, comfort, and maintenance matter. Wealth building isn't about buying the lowest number, it's about buying with a longer memory. Health costs were another wake-up call, not because they were shocking, but because they were ordinary. A stable financial life doesn't just prepare for rare disasters, it prepares for the annoyingly predictable expenses adulthood keeps sending. A little side income helped, but only because it was assigned carefully. Extra money can disappear faster than earned money when it feels optional. Used correctly, though, it can compress the timeline to your first real layer of safety. This is where the 30s advantage gets obvious. If you can combine discipline with skill growth, you're not only saving more efficiently, you're expanding the engine that makes saving possible in the first place. Comparison became easier to resist once he understood how incomplete visible success usually is. You rarely get to see the financing terms, the anxiety, the maintenance, or the lack of margin behind someone else's polished life. The chart didn't rise beautifully, it rose honestly. That matters. Real financial progress includes flat periods, frustrating months, and backward steps. What changed was not the absence of friction, but the presence of continuity. He also stopped treating all wealth as one blob. Cash solves timing problems. Retirement accounts solve long horizon problems. Flexible investments solve optionality problems. When you understand the jobs, you stop expecting one tool to do everything. By the end of year one, the numbers mattered, but the identity shift mattered more. He no longer saw himself as someone trying to catch up forever. He was now someone building structure on purpose. Then life did what life always does. An ugly repair bill arrived with bad timing and no concern for his plan. The difference now was simple. The problem was expensive, but it was no longer existential. That emotional contrast is one of the clearest signs wealth is becoming real. Same repair, same number, totally different nervous system. Paying cash doesn't make the bill fun, it just prevents the bill from breeding more problems. A few months later, a health expense tested the system again. Not a catastrophe, just another reminder that adulthood keeps charging admission. This time, the money had already been invited to the problem before the problem arrived. Then came a market drop, the kind that makes every beginner wonder if they picked the worst possible moment to start. Fear makes short-term movement look like permanent damage. Perspective is what shrinks it back to scale. He kept contributing, not because he knew the future, but because he knew his process.
Wealth building often improves when you stop trying to feel certain and start trying to stay consistent under uncertainty. The next test wasn't financial on paper, it was emotional. Rumors of layoffs spread through the office, and suddenly every conversation felt loaded. This is where wealth shows up as reduced desperation, not as visible luxury. A 3-month cushion doesn't make layoffs pleasant. What it does is buy time. And time during career instability is one of the most valuable financial assets a person can own. When the layoff actually happened, it still hurt. Wealth doesn't remove disappointment. But instead of collapsing into immediate survival mode, he could move into response mode, update the resume, contact people, assess the runway, think clearly. That's what a buffer really buys. Not just groceries and rent, but better decisions. He could target roles instead of accepting the first weak offer purely to stop the bleeding. That patience has economic value. When an offer came, he negotiated from stability instead of fear. That difference can echo for years. A calmer financial position often creates higher quality career outcomes because you can afford to think beyond this Friday. Saying no is expensive when you have no margin. It becomes possible when you do. Wealth is often less about what you can buy and more about what you are no longer forced to accept.
Even enjoyable moments changed. Travel, gifts, and family events stopped becoming future debt disguised as present joy. Planned spending carries a very different emotional texture than borrowing from tomorrow to fund today. This is also where visible status starts losing some of its magic. A beautiful monthly payment can hide a long chain of obligations. The product looks glamorous. The cash flow often looks much less impressive. The real comparison was never new versus old. It was obligated cash flow versus preserved optionality. Over time, the true cost of a vehicle includes not just the payment, but what that payment prevents you from doing elsewhere. Owning something less flashy can feel invisible in the moment, but invisibility is underrated. Quiet financial wins rarely impress bystanders. They mostly strengthen your own life in ways no one else can see. At this point, wealth starts showing up in conversations before it shows up in appearances. You hear sales pressure differently. You hear status pressure differently. You stop confusing expensive with important quite so easily.
It even changes your posture at work. When you aren't one paycheck from panic, you can set better boundaries. Not recklessly, not dramatically, just with more self-respect and less silent fear. Saying no to lifestyle expansion becomes easier once you understand the full cost. A beautiful upgrade doesn't only raise rent, it can reduce time, options, resilience, and your ability to handle the rest of life. And because he wasn't constantly patching emergencies, he could say yes to better uses of money. Skill building is one of the most underrated forms of wealth construction because it improves both present control and future income. He could even rest differently. Not because he stopped caring, but because every pause no longer felt financially irresponsible. Margin creates recovery, and recovery often protects the very judgment wealth depends on. Then came the kind of call that redefines what money means. His father's heating system failed in the middle of winter, and repair couldn't wait for perfect timing, paperwork, or anyone else's convenience.
He sent the money immediately. No interest charge, no frantic borrowing, no self-destruction disguised as generosity. That is a very different kind of wealth than the one most people imagine when they hear the word. That was the payoff. Not the account balance itself, the capacity it created. The ability to help someone you love quickly, usefully, and without turning yourself into the next emergency is one of the deepest forms of financial security. Once stability exists, generosity can become cleaner. Not performative, not self-sacrificing in a reckless way, just intentional. Wealth expands your ability to care for others without constantly trading away your own foundation. Relationships change a little too. When your money is less tangled up with image management, you stop needing every dinner, gift, or trip to communicate status. The interactions get lighter because the performance load gets smaller. By now, big purchases are judged differently. The question is no longer, can I technically make the payment? It becomes, what kind of life does this force me to maintain for the next 5 years?
He also learned that convenience deserves scrutiny. Some conveniences buy time meaningfully.
Others just make disorganization easier to fund. Wealth grows faster when you can tell the difference between support and leakage. The glamorous part still wasn't glamorous. Insurance checkups, beneficiaries, simple legal documents, organized records, none of it looks exciting, but wealth without basic protection is often less solid than it appears. Then came the more technical layer, understanding where money should live. Taxes, account types, access rules, these details may not feel emotional, but they quietly shape how efficiently your wealth can compound and remain useful. By this stage, net worth is no longer an ego score. It becomes a control panel, a way to see pressure early, make small corrections, and keep life moving in a chosen direction instead of a reactive one. By 39, Oliver didn't look dramatically richer. That's part of the lesson. Real financial strength often hides inside ordinary routines, ordinary clothes, ordinary transportation, and extraordinarily improved decision space. His days didn't become cinematic, they became steadier, and that might be the most undervalued upgrade of all. Money, handled well, can make normal life feel less fragile, and normal life is where most of us actually live. The future also changed shape. Instead of feeling like something that would happen to him, it became something he could prepare for, not control perfectly, but influence with structure, foresight, and a growing reserve of options. This is what wealth really starts to feel like: shock absorbers. Problems still hit, markets still wobble, work still changes, but the impact no longer transfers directly into panic because there is structure between the event and your survival. And that's the hidden superpower. Wealth improves the quality of your decisions. It gives you room to choose based on fit, values, and long-term consequences instead of raw urgency. Sometimes wealth means the freedom to wait, to not buy immediately, to not sign immediately, to not chase relief so quickly that you accidentally purchase a worse future just to escape today's discomfort. Sometimes it means the freedom to leave, a job, a deal, a living arrangement, a pattern that keeps draining you. Optionality is expensive to build, but being trapped is usually more expensive in the long run. Sometimes wealth means the freedom to support, to show up with resources, yes, but also with steadiness. People feel the difference between help that comes from abundance and help that comes from silent personal collapse. It even means the freedom to be imperfect. A stable system can absorb small mistakes. When every error is fatal, learning becomes terrifying. Margin lets adulthood remain human instead of permanently brittle. Eventually, the math does become more visible. Contributions stack, debt pressure eases, growth starts assisting the process. But compounding works best when it's built on behaviors sturdy enough to survive ordinary life. So no, starting in your 30s is not ideal in a pure textbook sense. But real wealth isn't built in a textbook. It's built by a person, and a more mature person often has better tools for the job. This doesn't turn into a perfect upward glide. There are still setbacks, wrong calls, and dull months. The difference is that the system can bend without breaking, which is exactly what most people are really trying to buy when they chase wealth. At 40, the biggest surprise wasn't the balance, it was the absence of constant internal emergency. The future still contained risk, but it no longer felt like a dark hallway he was forced to walk through blind. That's why wealth is better understood as readiness: cash for timing, investments for growth, protection for disruption, and judgment for everything numbers can't solve alone. It is architecture, not decoration. Starting in your 30s doesn't mean you missed the story. For a lot of people, it's when the story finally becomes honest enough to improve. Higher income helps, but clearer priorities are what turn income into actual power. So if you begin now, the goal isn't to look transformed overnight. It's to build a life that absorbs shocks, protects your thinking, and gives you room to choose. That is what building wealth really changes. Not just your numbers, but your stance toward the future.